Welcome to another episode of the Justice podcast. Once again, I'll be going solo because, just for a long story short, Tobbs went into some sort of real life accident and is currently recovering, but that's as far as I go because I don't want to go any further into details at his request. So, pretty much, all we can do is just hope that he recovers soon because, he's a good person all around and more importantly, his life depends on recovery more than him to appear in a show when he doesn't need to. But that aside, uh, we'll be talking about Power Rangers Turbo, as well as Sailor Moon S, and the two Ghost Rider movies made years ago. So let's go to left to right as always. Power Rangers Turbo is your third season of the Power Rangers series all around, meaning it's pretty much after Mighty Morphin and Zeo. It was our second ever costume change all around, and at one point we got ourselves a brand new recast. Well, we shouldn't say recast, more so character replacement. Kind of in a vein similar to MMPR Season 2 when Jason, Zach, and Trini were replaced by Rocky, Adam, and Aisha. In this case, it's almost the entire cast that gets replaced, although Justin did replace Rocky earlier on in the series, and by early on, I pretty much mean in the movie. So let's talk about that first. Turbo Power Rangers movie was the second theatrical Power Rangers movie ever made, and this time it's actually canon to the TV show, whereas the MMPR movie was its own continuity, pretty much a way for it to try and capitalize on the success of Mighty Morphin without really being a TV show and messing things up because its origin stories would pretty much be um, contradicting what we got with the TV show. We got to see the actual Zords get destroyed, whereas the Rangers were pretty much losing their powers. And Zordon wasn't affected in the TV show during the Ninja Quest while he was during the movie. Ninjor was the one that provided the powers, whereas the movie had to be Delcia, I think. And Ivan Ooze was a movie exclusive character, whereas we didn't really get anyone like him in season 3 apart from the actual characters, Rita Revolto and Master Vile, the likes of which were carried over from Kaka Ranger, the season that was inspired by MPR season 3, or was inspiration for MPR season 3, I should say. Put that aside. Yeah, much like the first movie, the Turbo was pretty much its own sort of original creation for the movie itself. Uh, no Sentai footage was used, which was pretty cool. Even the Megazord was original footage. And that's pretty hard devotion, if I do say so myself. The movie itself was honestly kind of fun to watch back then, mostly because it reminds me of the kind of stuff I'd watch, where it's pretty much youthful characters going up against a big bad, and uh, nowadays looking back at it now, it kind of reminds me of the Disney Channel sort of thing. In fact, the more I think about it, the more I think that Power Rangers from the early to mid '90s were kind of reminiscent of what I'd see on Disney Channel or early '90s, um, live action show that's more comedic, whereas Power Rangers from In Space to RPM felt more like what I used to with PR. Not that it's a bad thing per se, it's just that uh, whereas In Space to RPM felt more like a sort of kid version of an adult, like an older fan, like an older watch or like an older audience sort of series like Smallville or Stargate SG-1. Like Power Rangers Turbo felt more reminiscent of an action version of what I'd see from uh, anything that was around at the time, which isn't a bad thing. It's just something I noticed. I mean, it has quite a bit in common with stuff in terms of the similar tone to some of the films that were meant for kids as part of a typical live action adaptation of a uh, movie property. Although an animated property, Power Rangers was never animated. It's just it started as a TV show, then it had a movie because they wanted to capitalize on its success. Typical IP recognition like that. Apart from all that, I will say that the Turbo movie itself is alright. It definitely felt more in line with being your average sort of um, Power Rangers tie-in sort of deal. I mean, it's more so meant to just capitalize on them trying to take advantage of the brand recognition and get people to watch the movie so they can get more attention for Turbo. But the thing was is that like Turbo itself just felt kind of a unusual season to take advantage of. Like I get they wanted to go for like these sort of high tech sort of vehicles as well as the fact it was another suit change, but Turbo just feels like the weirdest season to make a movie out of. I think In Space would be a pretty cool choice all around, just because you have much like more dynamic flair for it. But whatever, like I'm not a business expert, but I do know for a fact that Turbo definitely tanked in the ratings, whereas In Space brought the series higher up once again. Obviously not NPR levels, but very good nonetheless. And yeah, the movie itself was pretty much like another way to try and put us in a new uh, season. Your characters have to deal with like new enemies. This time we got to deal with like Divatox and her crew. We also have to deal with the fact that in little elf named Larigo is stranded on Earth and has to be with his family or reunite with them. And he holds a magical power that can help the Rangers, which can also help the villains if they use him because he can actually revive an ancient monster within the volcano. And the Rangers got to stop that because they don't want that to happen. During all this, Bulk and Skull get captured by the bad guys, and at one point, uh, Jason and Kimberly surprisingly return once again, and they get brainwashed as well near the end of the movie. Now, it's kind of funny to look back on this because actually, Kimberly was actually mentioned at one point in Zeo, whereas Jason was pretty prominent near the second half of Zeo because he was a Gold Ranger. So it is kind of cool that we get to see the characters return. Just to show out the sort of like world building aspect that even though the original characters aren't around that much, they're at least prominent to some extent. It kind of shows the sort of like connectivity that Power Rangers has from season to season. Not like Super Sentai where it's like, oh guys, look at this new season hype, new toy, and they toss it all aside for the next one. I mean, Power Rangers does sort of do that sort of thing now, when for a good while after like Lost Galaxy, where it was mostly a fresh retake, but it felt more natural to some extent when it came to like the connectivity between everything. Like they didn't forget stuff, if that makes sense. Anyways, at one point, Rocky gets injured, and a new kid has to take over as he sneaks up and becomes the Blue Turbo Ranger. So yeah, we'll get to Justin in a bit. Beyond that, the Zero Rangers pretty much become the Turbo Rangers, and now they got to go up against the new threats, Divatox and Save Larigo. They go on a pirate ship. They take on all these sorts of weird freaks, and it is what it is. Like it's mostly meant to be your typical big movie that's meant to capitalize on the success of a TV show, and it does a decent job. I do think there are things I like about this one more than I do the MPR movie, but I do think the MPR movie benefits from being its own world than this one. Like, I like the Megazord fight we get here. We rarely get ourselves original Megazord footage, let alone ones that involve costume props. So the fact that we actually get one that involves like a nicely done costume prop for the Megazord instead of CGI like with the Ninja Megazord is a huge win if you ask me. Now, of course, there's no need for that sort of thing with PR because most of the time it's pretty much like a one and done deal. They don't really need to make any new footage. Sometimes they do Zord footage, which they do of late in recent seasons, but you get a sense that they're not really prioritizing that sort of thing because they much prefer to use the simpler footage to take advantage of, mostly in the form of the Ranger outfits. And that's perfectly fine, but I do think every once in a while new Megazord footage would be cool to have. I mean, they did it back then mostly because they wanted to try and make some new stories. Although I will say that without the lack of experience that the Sentai actors had, the original Megazord footage definitely shows its like difference in terms of quality because the mobility for the suits isn't as um, like free as we got with the Japanese suits. And beyond that, Turbo the Power Rangers movie is pretty average as a movie on its own. As for being a Power Rangers movie, I do think it does all right. Though I can't really say that it's my favorite movie. It's serviceable. It does the job all right. And for what it's worth, it did try to make itself important by typing or by hyping up everything that was relating to Power Rangers Turbo. But as we're about to delve into, the show itself really wasn't as exciting to go for. Now let's talk about the characters real quick, mostly the new ones. Justin is the new Blue Turbo Ranger, replacing Rocky, which is amusing because Rocky was pretty much a replacement for both the Red Ranger role with Mighty Morphin and the Blue Ranger role for Zeo after Billy couldn't take the Zeo crystal. And now the replacement gets replaced by freaking Justin. Justin is sort of an answer to kids wanting to be like the Power Rangers because, like, they wanted to have this sort of attachment to the Rangers as far as like looking up to them. Like they see them as their role models. That's typical stuff. So I'm pretty sure Saban thought to themselves, okay, let's try and make like a kid that's actually a Power Ranger, and the end result is kind of how should I say this? Mixed. Like there are people that didn't mind Justin, but there's some that didn't really like him whatsoever. They thought he was far too annoying at times, or they thought he was kind of like there just to try and like be a gimmick. I mean, he was in a spot similar to Jake Lloyd, who played Anakin Skywalker in the Phantom Menace. And although he didn't get any of the and although he doesn't get any of the like the gross treatment that Jake received, the and although Jake Lloyd doesn't, and although Blake Foster doesn't get the same treatment that Jake got, even to this day, thankfully, Blake's character definitely doesn't really stand out that well amongst the fans for being a fan favorite, especially considering the fact that Justin himself really wasn't like easy to like be won over. And I think he took up all the spotlight, but it felt more like it was just them trying to be a gimmick, in a sense. Like I don't hate him 100%, and I've seen worse characters in the Power Rangers universe, especially ones that are underdeveloped, like the Ninja Steel cast. But I can't deny that this guy is pretty lackluster all around as far as an overall character. He was pretty alright in his space, but apart from that, nothing that exciting. We also have ourselves new mentor allies in the form of um, yeah. We also have ourselves new mentor allies in the form of Alpha something. There's too many alphas. I think it's Alpha 6. He was best known for his sort of like street talk, the yo 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 sort of thing instead of ay 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 ay, which has its sort of like annoyance all around, especially with people that are just tired of having to hear him talk like that constantly. The original Alpha from Mighty Morphin Power Rangers itself was like charming because he had this sort of like craziness as far as being um, childlike and sort of had to look up to the Rangers as you know like older siblings at times. Whereas this new Alpha is just pretty much like there. He's pretty annoying. His voice isn't really that good. He had his like vocals damaged at one point in his space, but got them repaired to sort of sound closer to the original Alpha. Although he was more high pitched in space, and it was most notable to me when I saw him go like, "No, Adam, don't do it!" when Adam was about to morph with his broken power morpher. Speaking of Adam, we also have to talk about the new characters. So we have TJ, who pretty much replaces Tommy. I like TJ. He's pretty awesome all around. Now, admittedly, he does have to fit in the sort of gap that, like Tommy had because Tommy himself was this really, like legendary character even in the beginning because he was monumental for being the first ever Green Ranger, at least officially back then before we got ourselves the Dino Fury Green Ranger established years later. But that's a different story. We also have to consider the fact that Tommy was the first ever Six Ranger and has had 3, if not 4, different power sets. Mighty Morphin Green and White, as well as Zero Red and then Turbo Red, which was temporary. So yeah, there was quite a lot for TJ to look up to. But that being said, I do think TJ himself does pretty well as a leader. In fact, the more I think about it, the more he fits the Red Turbo Ranger role more than I do Tommy does. Although I will admit to the fact that uh, like TJ stands out even further when it comes to being the Blue Ranger for in space, but that's a whole other story. We also have ourselves in the other Rangers that we have to talk about. Carlos replaces Adam as the Green Ranger. He's much more he's much more like even though he's like pretty smart all around, he is kind of reckless at times and kind of prove himself to like go in and have a sort of like hot-headed feel to him. But nonetheless, you get a sense that the two of them actually managed to see eye to eye with each other. And hey, I'll give him credit for at least making the connection much stronger when it came to their return of Adam in space. Especially in the fact that Carlos became a Black Ranger, and his predecessor was once a Black Ranger, which I think is a pretty cool connection. And we even get an even stronger one with just like the episode that involves Adam's return, and as he tries to help him feel less guilty about what he's gotten himself into. Then we also have Ashley, who is the new Yellow Ranger. She's very compassionate, almost more so than Tanya was, especially considering the fact that Tanya probably didn't seem as long lasting as a ranger, especially compared to her predecessor Aisha. But that was a pretty good choice all around for her. The two of them managed to make the most out of what's available for them when it came to having predecessors to look up to, and it's kind of amusing for Ashley to have a predecessor who was pretty much the successor to her predecessor. And then there's also the fact that pretty much every other ranger was replaced one way or another. Pretty much they've had predecessors all around. It's some sort of weird lineage, if you ask me. And on society, we also have ourselves Cassie, the new pink Turbo Ranger. And it's kind of amusing to think of her, considering the fact that she's much more she's more angsty in some ways. Not angsty, but she's more she's kind of more outgoing in a way. It's I don't really see the suit and think of her. I more so think of her as the Space Pink Ranger. But it's weird too because apart from Justin, I don't really see either of the Turbo Rangers as the definitive ones. It's this sort of weird amalgamation between Tommy and TJ, Adam and Carlos, etc., etc. Whereas I can look at Zeo Red and think to myself, yes, that's Tommy. Same way I would Mighty Morphin Green and White. Or I look at the Blue Space Ranger and think, yes, that is TJ. Anyone that thinks like that, or is it just me? Apart from that, the Ranger Souls are pretty cool. I think they're able to not deal with too much of the problems that the Mighty Morphin team had, or the Zeo team had when it came to the Turbo Rangers, because the Turbo Rangers were much more different when it came to the stock footage, because they were portrayed somewhat differently than the old Rangers were in terms of mannerisms. So I think using the new characters would help fit them better, although they did go with American footage. Especially when it came to new additional characters such as the Blue Centurion, who was a futuristic police officer, and he's from the future. He has this message about an invasion, and I think is a pretty good addition to just show how big the Power Rangers world is, especially how unexplored the potential is for the future. And in a way, I think you can see him as sort of a warning for the series as a whole, where he was pretty much there to say stuff oh, if we don't do this, then we're pretty much doomed. Kind of how if it wasn't for the direction they took from in space, then the series itself would not be where it is now. Because there are times actually where Power Rangers was going to face cancellation. They thought they were going to have to cancel the series after in space, but as we all know, the series itself continued on, and it's kind of surprising to see how far the series goes without being canceled permanently. But yeah, we also have ourselves a Phantom Ranger who's very mysterious. He's from Meltar. Nobody knows who he is. People try to theorize stuff oh, is he a Ranger from the future, or is he Billy from Mighty Morphin? But we can theorize all we want. but we'll never ever find a proper identity. And I'm honestly okay if we never find out who he truly is because I don't really care about what he'd be like without the identity exposed because uh honestly it's just kind of like one of those things where I'm not going to lose sleep over it. I just am happy to know that this guy is still being theorized to this day. And considering the fact that some reveals end up being disappointing, then yeah, don't expect people to take one reveal happily if they get this sort of thing done because Power Rangers fandom is very erratic and at times toxic, but they don't want to admit it. And if they do, they try to act like they're the voice of reason, but then they end up being fucking hypocritical and they bitch about Hasbro when there's something that they don't like. Sometimes it's reasonable, but most of the time it's petty as hell. That aside, we also have ourselves Demetria, who I forgot to mention, but yeah, she is the new mentor. She doesn't really add much to the series. She's just like this cloaked woman who's very ominous, very mysterious. And yeah, she doesn't really assist the Rangers that much compared to Zordon. Maybe she was for a new team that would work well, but she feels like when you're using a new program while your other one's currently missing or unavailable. It's like when you're driving with it's like when you're using a new voice for your computer. Like you have Microsoft Sam for so long, then you use Microsoft Mary. It doesn't feel right. Because you're so attached to one version of a text to speech voice, much like how you'd be attached to Zordon because he was around, he felt impactful, if that made sense. Demetria doesn't really have that sort of impact. But thankfully, Divatox is very impactful all around because she is very animated, she is very um, spontaneous, and she's definitely another great addition to the team of villains that we've gotten. It's great that we have ourselves a character like her to go along with the likes of Lord Zed and um, everyone else was from the Machine Empire from Zeo. But yeah, it was great to see her, especially considering the fact that she was kind of like a mix between a sort of Queen of Evil as well as a kind of a pirate in a way. We also have plenty of other mooks to go along with her, such as Elgar and Rygog, some of which I think were either originally created or were originally from Car Ranger. But yeah, it is one of those things. I do think that like Theotox stands out to me immensely because she's a pretty slick looking villain. Rita Repulse from Mighty Morphin definitely looks more like an evil witch. Some people might be attracted to her, especially during season 2 and 3 when she make herself look more beautiful to make herself attractive to Lord Zed. But yeah, Diva Talks, if Rita Repulsa could definitely be like the lunch lady from school, then Diva Talks could definitely be someone's like hot mommy, if that makes sense. But yeah, apart from that stupid commentary, yeah, let's talk about the aesthetics. The suits themselves are all right. They're very basic. They have a very distinct car theme to them, mostly with the visors, the sort of like LED, like the headlights, as well as the return of the colored mouth plates. They're very distinct. The suits that they wear around them not as specific or unique to them. I mean, they're very basic, but even less iconic than either the MMPR suits or the Zeo suits. Not terrible, but nothing that exciting either. I think it's the helmets that make them stronger all around because there's more detail put into them. The same, however, cannot be said for the Blue Centurion and the Phantom Ranger because they're very unique in terms of their designs. Blue Centurion might fit in more for a sort of extra hero sort of gap that we got with his fellow members of Blue. Um, you know, Ninjor and Arc the Conqueror because his silhouette's very unique. He's very mechanical. Now, Ninjor is pretty much like a bulky ranger, and Arctic Conqueror is more like an intermediate sort of thing between Ranger Ally and Zord. Well, it seems to be said for Ninjor as well. But the Blue Centurion himself is like pretty fun to watch. He's basically RoboCop if he was a mix between like more so being rated G and rated PG. Like it's kind of amusing to think because like even though Car Ranger is more so comedic in terms of like tone, the aesthetics really still look very like something you could take seriously. That if you get what I'm saying, because there was a time when I was looking up Big Bad Beetleborgs because I remember it being a thing. I was like, oh yeah, I remember Big Bad Beetleborgs. That was sort of like another Power Rangers ripoff. Before I found out that was no, it was actually made by Saban, adapting the B Fighters stuff. And I remember that they didn't adapt the one after um, the metallic, the one that was used for metallics, and because it looked so goddamn ridiculous. Literally, like you had some of the characters like when they become like their super forms, the character designs don't look too bad. They look pretty dynamic, if a little classic, not as like as badass or as aggressive looking as um, the original Beetleborg designs. Well, as aggressive as they can possibly be. I mean, big bad Beetleborgs they are, but they don't really feel that big or bad. But yeah, dad joke aside, you also have like the fact that their like normal forms are very cutesy, very chibi, very Japanese inspired, which is definitely not the sort of aesthetics that Power Rangers would go for because they're more so like like a general aesthetic to them. There's some that are kind of comedic, but not to the point where like not to the point where like borders around being too slapstick comedic, if that makes any vague sort of sense. And the Blue Centurion thankfully doesn't sort of go for that sort of comedic B fighter series approach. He definitely feels more like a classic robot, like Japan's take on RoboCop, but Sentai and Toku inspired. And he doesn't look that bad either. I do hope we get ourselves a Lightning Collection version of him at some point. That'd be fucking great. We got one for the Phantom Ranger, and speaking of, he's pretty badass. He's more close to being a Ranger, and this time we made him as a Sixth Ranger. And although he's not really part of the team as like full on team, he's more separate from the others because of his role. We made a bigger deal out of him than Japan did, as Dawson Rider would say, and I see why because there's so much you can do with a mysterious character like him. Like when Power Rangers does stuff that the Sentai didn't, whether it's something that's really awesome and great like this, or the way we have like Trent's character work in Dino Thunder, or for something that's seen on paper but could be executed better, like with Super Mega Force, the Super Mega Mode and whatnot. Apart from all that, it was great to see the character again. He doesn't really show up again um, after in space, but that's fine because the characters are returning once again. The comic books getting quite a bit of spotlight, and it is definitely some stuff that fans should look out for if they want to like learn more about this sort of series. And there's also the Zords. I mean, you have the typical weapons and the role play stuff, but I think the Zords themselves actually look pretty cool. I mean, sure, I much prefer more animal-based Zord designs, especially when you can come up with creative transformations for them, whether it's single units like the White Tiger Zord or multiple units of varying sizes like Wild Force. But I have to give credit to them for actually making the Zord vehicles look very like sleek, very dynamic, very badass. Um, I like cars, and while it is available, if people would be like interested in driving them because you don't want to get themselves in an accident, you can't deny the fact that cars are pretty awesome. And while it is kind of typical to see like an average like little kid get themselves a Hot Wheels more than anything else because nothing is as fun as going vroom vroom and beep beep and whatnot with a toy car. The fact that Power Rangers were involved with that sort of thing makes it even more exciting, and the fact that they can turn into a Megazord is just the icing on the cake. The first Megazord does feel more like simple and reminiscent of like a classic robot, whereas the Turbo Rescue Megazord the one that has the Zords become little robots, kind of like your average sort of Transformers combiner team, does feel more up my alley, especially considering the fact that it's much more powerful in design. And of course, we also have like the Blue Centurion Zone Zord. The I think they called it like well, not Rail Racer. That's more like the name of the train combiner from RID 2001. Um, Robo Racer, I think, possibly that. But it's kind of like your cop car that turns into a robot, and yeah, it's actually kind of a cute little like addition to the team. Very small, but it is kind of like a nice like precursor to the police themed mecha we got for SPD. Although we'll say that Space Patrol Delta definitely looks more badass. And we also have ourselves the Phantom Rangers like Artillotron, which is a massive, not really Zord carrier, but still, it's the one that brought over the Turbo Rescue Zords. It's very big and chunky, almost like if Power Rangers memes were more than just your typical MMPR related stuff or whatever was based on the new season. I would love to have seen Power Rangers fans try and do big chunkus memes with the Artillotron. If they can make it ring very well, that is, because it's kind of hard to do. But apart from all that, it's also great to see like the fact that the ending of the season actually has us going straight towards in space because Diva Talks manages to like wear the Rangers down and as well as bomb the base. And now they find out that Zordon was actually captured at one point, and the team has to go look for him. So they go on an Asada shuttle. Justin stays behind, saying goodbye to the friends he made, and now the Rangers are about to go to space. And believe me when I say that, like that was a great way to prepare yourself for a new season. I mean, usually, like when Power Rangers tries to prepare itself for like the next season, usually in the form of like this season finale that we do on Nickelodeon, it's more of a case of them being like, okay, like let's wrap it up quickly and just wait a few months for the super season to come out. Whereas here, like they are actually urgent, not in the sense of trying to rush it out, but more so the fact that they found out that Zordon's missing and they got to rescue him. But it feels like there's very no hope. They got their backs on the wall until there's a small glimmer of like possibility that they can actually win this fight by going in a Santa shuttle. But nobody knows what to expect from there. And the next season definitely has a lot to go over. So yeah, Power Rangers Turbo isn't a good season, but it is fun to watch from time to time. I wouldn't put it as one of my worst, especially considering the fact that there's way worse of recent times. But it is one of my least favorite seasons from what we've seen before. Although I will say it does try to like go for it with a much more ambitious approach with the storytelling, which progress more and more like in space to RPM, where it doesn't feel as afraid to like go forward with its punches as much as Power Rangers is nowadays. I mean, not so much with Dino Fury and Beast Morphers because they at least try Dino Fury a little bit more. But let's be honest, the Neo Saban era was far too samey, and while there have been a few good moments here and there, I do think that Turbo tried more to do what it had at its arsenal when it comes to being much more ambitious compared to the Neo Saban era. And I guess the movie itself is like complimentary, but I wouldn't really watch it that much unless it was just like pop it in and be like, okay, we'll just watch Turbo. So yeah, Power Rangers Turbo, not that bad, but there are things that could have been worse. Next up, we'll be taking a look at Sailor Moon S, specifically the Cloverway dub. Now, the past two seasons of the series have been very much under the influence of Deke, and I have to be honest and say that I actually did, and I actually the last two seasons were under the production or the distribution of Deke, and I have to be honest and say that I actually did enjoy my watch of that version of the anime because while it wasn't faithful or like had to make most out of the sort of censorship that was there. It was still fun to watch, and there's a lot of personality put into the characters all around, which is something that I don't think is quite there with the modern Viz dub, which I don't think is terrible, but there is a certain spirit to it that just feels a little lacking. Either that, or I'm just like not someone that is obsessed with like accuracy to the subs because I'm not some sort of anime nut. Apart from that, Yeah, I do think that the Cloverway dub has a few things that make it closer to the original dialogue of the Japanese version, mostly in the form of the fact that it doesn't try to censor itself that much. Though I will say that they actually went a step further by making sure that the music was intact, as well as using some of the Japanese names for the characters. I mean, there were a few changes here and there, and of course, it did keep the original, like the new names for the characters already established. Like Serena was still called Serena instead of being renamed to Usagi, though you had characters that were pretty much like named without any of their Japanese names being altered. Like Dr. Tomo was still Dr. Tomo, Hotaru Tomo was still Hotaru. They didn't give her a new name. Um, Although weirdly enough, like some of the characters that were already planned and that were early on in the series, like Haruka and Michiru were renamed as Amara and Michelle. Now, I'm going to theorize and say that the reason why they named the characters for those two, but they didn't change the name for Hotaru and her sort of colleagues was because like early on in the production before the North American dub was temporarily put in a halt um, for a while, like the people behind the original dub were pretty much like planning it out with certain character names, to localize the series, which was a thing that was done back then. But by the time Cloverway got involved, the characters that were not for scripts that were not written yet, they decided to keep some of the Japanese names intact as well as the production. So that's my theory that the script writing for the translations were done first, but not all of them were done until we got to the involvement of Cloverway. And as a result, Cloverway not only kept some of the names intact for characters that were not yet introduced before they got involved, but they're also responsible for leaving the music in, as well as having no unique additions that were there from the previous seasons, like the transitions and the lack of censorship. Although I will say that apparently, Toonami did censor the series, not as much as Deke did, but to some extent they did. There are DVD releases that did not censor the series, however. Although I will get into one detail that they probably could have added in nonetheless, or at least rewrite it from some sort of other way. First, let's talk about the new characters. Because at this point, we already know Serena, Amy, Ray, Lita, and Mina, as well as Rini, who returns and is now a Sailor Scout. We already know Darien. Let's talk about the new scouts. We have ourselves Amara and Michelle, who are sailors Uranus and Neptune. They are a new addition to the team, although they're not quite as part of the team, the main team overall. They're more of an extension. They're more sort of like the backup. They're part of a different sort of alignment of the Sailors, Scout, or Guardians. Especially considering the fact that they have different ways of saving the world as well as stopping the Death Busters. Mostly the fact that they're trying to look for the pure heart crystals because they don't want them to power up Mistress Nine and destroy the world, which were part of the visions that Ray kept on getting. Amara was very much known for her rather masculine appearance, despite being female, to the point where some girls thought that she was a guy. But I like that part of her. She's described as a butch lesbian on Twitter, but I think it's a great way to help her distinct a lot more because she's much more serious than the other characters, and you get a sense of her as well as Michelle have their own sort of dynamic sort of um, approach with being written. They're written differently. Some might say that they belong in a different series because of how they might clash with the others, but I think they're assigned to show that they're not going to see eye to eye with the main five. Although I will say that at times it did get a little reasonable, like they always sort of be like, "Oh, you're in the way," or they tried to be like, "Oh, you have to protect the Moon Princess," but now we decided to fight her. And I will say it was kind of funny that they actually fought against Serena at one point, but her Moon Crystal pretty much pushed both of them aside, and they're like, "Okay, you win. We're done. Goodbye." That was hilarious all around. But yeah, I did like the characters for the most part. Um, And then some of the way they acted, like in terms of like not willing to support the others, did get kind of repetitive, and I didn't like. I agree with their approach of always trying to antagonize them as much as I didn't like the way that Serena and Sailor Moon didn't want to like fight them. I mean, the other scouts were reasonable enough; they wanted to like actually stop them, put some sense in them, especially Jupiter at one point. But yeah, like Moon was pretty much like, "No, we can't fight because she's very peaceful." And yeah, she made a point. Like she, I had her crystal like open up and blast both of them aside, and now they said like, okay, we're done, goodbye. Say Uranus and Neptune as they retire and are not shown again until Stars, apparently. I mean, Michelle is pretty much the more friendly of the two. Weirdly enough, when she and Amara met for a while in their backstory, they pretty much seemed like she was the first one to unlock her powers. She didn't want, I mean, but she was really in the kind of role that would fit Amara better because Amara's a more like the more cold, the more serious of the two. The one that's like, oh, we have this sort of like curse with us. Now we have to go with it. You would think that that would be for Amara, but no, it was actually Michelle that had a sort of thing, and that just kind of threw me off. But apart from that, like Michelle was definitely the more friendly of the two. She's pretty much like willing to do anything that Amara says because she looks up to her. One thing that well means a lot, but I'm mixed on is the fact that they're renamed as cousins instead of being a lesbian couple. Now I understand the fact that they weren't sure about how people would react to um, like the LGBT stuff in American television at the time. Little by little, they managed to like weave it in and make sure that was not just like forced into people's mouths, and more so just like, hey, these characters happen to be gay or lesbian, and like, well, the rules have laxed over time for television, especially children's television, to show LGBT support. This was a time period when they were still pretty much like trying to make it localized. And while it was like less censored than the older stuff, they were still trying to like make the most out of how to pass these characters as not being lesbian. If they wanted to do that sort of thing, the least they could do is have it be hinted at and not have them be cousins, but instead be good friends, best friends, in fact. Because having them be cousins is very strange. Now, it's funny as hell to say that. It's like, oh, they're the Cusbians, ha ha ha, he he he. But it doesn't make any sense, especially with the fact that there's no, like, familial sense in them. Plus, their backstory, like they act like this is the first time they met, yet they say that they're cousins. Like that doesn't really make any sort of sense. If they were like, it just doesn't really work all that well. It just seems so awkward. If like I said, they could have just had it be like, oh, we're friends. If they were still afraid of like going with the fact that they're like a lesbian couple, the least they could do is just have them say that they're their best friends, close friends, and hint at their relationship. The cousin thing, I think, is like funny as hell, but in actuality, is kind of dumb. Now, that's one of the few things I don't like about like the North American change. Of course, Viz brought it back in, which is pretty good, and like it is a shame that not even the DVD releases could restore the couple. Like if they couldn't make them, like I said, if they couldn't make them be a lesbian couple, then at the least they could do is just say that they're friends and have it be hinted at. That'd still be a good compromise. Not one I'd go like 100% with, but it'd still be like approachable nonetheless. Still better than like having this sort of weird Alabama thing, some weird ass Sweet Home sort of shit. But apart from all that, we also have ourselves Trista, who is Sailor Pluto. She appeared previously in R, very briefly, but she appeared a little bit more often. And at times we had to see her like as a friend for Rini because Rini liked being friends with Trista. Although now like there's a bit of a conflict between like everyone else between like her and uh, Rini because like Trista's not the others because she too also wants to go against the fact that they're trying that the Inners are trying to like keep Hotaru safe. Rini is friends with Hotaru, who turns out to be a reincarnation of Sailor Saturn, and considering the fact that she is like the guardian of destruction and whatnot, like and held like one of her moon, one of Saturn's moons is pretty much inspired, and he looks just like the Death Star. For fuck's sakes, I think Qatar's a Sith Lord. No, I'm just kidding. But more importantly, the fact that like these characters, um, the others don't see her as like no like in addition to the fact that they doubt like Sailor Moon's approach in trying to like make Ataru a good guy again or make her good or trying to redeem her, they don't think that that Hotaru would be like anyone to trust because of her deadly powers, her connection to Mr. Stein, and her connection to the Death Busters. Speaking of, the Death Busters consist of likes of Dr. Tomo and his group of the uh, the witches of the Bad Behavior Bureau or something, the Witches Five or the Bad Bitches of Behavior Bureau or something like that. It's a ridiculous name. Most of them look so similar to each other, but like most of the ones that stood out to me, like me, Matt, just because of her glasses, her obsession with trying to like be with guys, mostly superstars, and the fact that she kept on feeling Dr. Tomo, and as well as the fact that she like got herself sucked into a television and tried to make herself look massive and powerful. But the plug literally gets pulled on her, and she no longer lives after being stuck in television forever. So great job, idiot. It's kind of hard to keep track of those other characters because they're so similar to one another in roles. Kind of like the same thing can be said for like the Dark Moon Clan that we got in the latter half of our. I think that season one's like the generals of Queen Beryl, I think, still stand out to me because they were fewer in quantity and their characterizations were different from one another. Jedi was much more sinister, is much more like sneery. Nephrite was much more manipulative. Zoisite was much more antagonizing, and uh, Malachite was much more final bossy, like second in command all around. Felt like the best for last sort of guy, even though he got made fun of for his hair. But yeah, like like the season one villains, I think are still the best. We'll see about season like four's villains, just to see how much they'll stick with me in terms of like identity and as well as like how they try to avoid being so repetitive. Now, I mentioned the fact that the music itself was intact for this season after the first two seasons had original music, which I can appreciate because, like the original music for the North American dub, as iconic as it is and as fun as it can be used quite often. It can be quite repetitive at times, so I do appreciate them going for the music they got for season three. And like the Japanese music definitely has a different vibe to it. It's not. It doesn't feel as localized or Saturday morning cartoony. It feels more in vein with something you'd actually watch for an anime, like a classic one. Obviously, there's some tracks I do like quite a bit. There's some tracks I don't really like that much. I will say that every time the first time they usually introduce like Amara and Michelle, at times with a sort of little like ooh, ooh sort of chorus, not ooh ooh, but like the little like ooh sort of chorus, that sort of dilly thing. Um, that gets repetitive at times, especially when you do it like three fucking times. But yeah, the music itself is serviceable. Some parts of it can be very dynamic. I liked the music that was heard when Amara and Michelle transform. The violin just makes it so like bass all around. And I did like the Moonlight Densetsu renditions that were heard with a more somber tone. Though it does give me an idea for rescoring some of these scenes with more cinematic music, if that makes any sense. Um, And I will say that sometimes, as a result of them like not going for any edits, the episodes at times do feel really long. Now, the pacing of the first two seasons episodes can either be like a good pace, or it could be a little too fast. Not terribly so, but they could be a little fast. Whereas here, it already feels like it's the opposite, where some episodes have a pretty good tone, like a pretty good pace, whereas others feel like they pad out at times, usually in the form of like the lack of any music to make things seem a little faster, or the fact that they pad out on itself for comedic effect, or to try and make it seem more dynamic, but it doesn't really work out that well because making something feel more dynamic or dramatic in animation wouldn't really be as effective as it is in live action. Or if you're going for a different approach, like the slower tone in Batman the Animated Series, I think works better because it feels more noir inspired. Whereas well, not apples to apples. The way it's done here just feels more like they're trying to pass stuff out in the form of pan shots and silence. which can be broken up at times with like the dub app living. So yeah, it's one of those things that is noteworthy when it comes to the way it was handled here in terms of the pacing and tone. Now I should mention one other thing about S as well as Super S. Most of the characters are already established. We're given new voices. Now, for some of the characters that weren't prominent, that wasn't so much of a bad thing. Like Andrew, I didn't really mind his voice being different, although Grandpa Hino's voice sounding like different from what we got with the first two seasons was very strange because Grandpa Hino had a very specific voice to him. You know, typical like old man voice that they try to go for in cartoons and older anime, and the recasting here just sticks out so badly. It just doesn't work all that well. But it's more noticeable with the more prominent characters. Now, Serena, Amy, and Mina are the only characters to be recast entirely. Uh, let's talk about Serena's new voice actress, Linda Ballantyne. Now, Terry Hawks is obviously a very beloved amongst most of the fans because if they're not like your average sort of like Viz or Japanese sub purist, then they'd be pretty um, like happy with what they got. It stands out. It's very well done, and more importantly, they just managed to feel very like animated all around. And I definitely do like uh, Serena's voice for Terry Hawks. Linda Ballantyne's voice, on the other hand, like on top of it, trying to live up to the sort of legacy that Terry Hawks had, if that makes any sense. Like she's trying to do her best to impersonate her, but at times it works out quite well when she's very casual. Other times it sounds very uh, strange. It's like I don't hate it, but at the same time, it just sounds like, "What are you doing?" Like she just sounds so like erratic. She sounds like she's got like she sounds like this a lot. It's just so like, oh Darian. It's like she sounds like that. It's like she's like Darian. That sort of voice that they do all the time. That's what like she sounds like at times when she's yelling, and it just kind of gets at nerves at times, or on my nerves at times. It just sounds like she's trying so hard to impersonate her, but at the same time she's trying not to. Like I don't know. When things get like very serious and more dramatic, she doesn't sound that bad. But yeah, I didn't really like the things that some of our new voice actors did. Um, not again, not terrible. I don't hate her as much as like other people do, but at the same time, I do know for a fact that more could have been done with making sure that we get a voice actor that sounded closer to her, or at least having her like improve stuff. But they were on a rush. Lisa Balkan definitely doesn't have the same sort of like cutesy voice that like uh, Karen Bernstein had for Amy Anderson, or I should say Amy Mizuno, because they brought back the Japanese name or last name, which I'm fine with. You know, Anderson just sounds kind of a weird last name for her. Although I can headcanon the fact that, um, well, we're not sure if like Amy was born like reborn as a like normally would like naturally born in from a human being and from a human mother once again, because we don't know their backstories for shit. All we know is that we saw a glimpse of her as like a little baby. But my head headcanon's the fact that Amy, along with the others, were possibly reborn and but were actually adopted. Like their spirits were like, flew to the earth, and they manifested themselves as like babies in baskets to be adopted by people. And she happened to be adopted by someone who might have been in the last name of Anderson and another person who might have been in the last name of Mizuno. The Anderson could have been her father's last name, and Mizuno could have been her mother's last name. And that might explain why she's got both last names, but that's just my theory. But yeah, Lisa Balkan definitely sounds different from Karen Bernstein. She's somewhat quieter and doesn't have the same sort of like cutesy energy to her. Like not that she's like your typical modern anime character. Like Amy's like Mercury is very specific in terms of her like the way people see her as a cute character, but she's got the more sort of like I don't know what it is. Like her voice isn't as like bouncy, I guess, or is kind. It's hard to describe, but but like the new voice is more quiet, I should say. She doesn't sound quite as like social around as Karen was as the series went along. But hey, she does say Hunkosaurus in the next season, so there's that. Um, the new voice actress for Mina, though, I'm gonna be honest and say that like it's all right. I mean, I don't really think it's that bad. Um, Stephanie Morgenstein, her voice is a little more like casual compared to Emily Clary Barlow, who was a CW voice. Like Barlow is much more expressive all around. Although I will say that we got to see her at one point for the voice of Sailor Mars for some of the other episodes that were around uh, when Katie Griffin was unavailable for some reason. No idea why she wasn't, but only she knows. But yeah, like Barlow wasn't that bad. She's much more in line with how the character would naturally evolve to be more comedic, be more silly, being more reckless compared to the voice we got for um, like Stephanie Morgenstein, was much more casual. She's much more kind. She's much more reserved. Although we do see moments of her being silly in the first two seasons, especially when it came to like her reactions as well as her sort of episodes where she got the focus, like when she was Nurse Venus and she kept on ruining stuff. But beyond that, like some of the other voice actors were kept in the series. I know for a fact that uh, like Susan Roman was still Jupiter, aka Lita, and she was still around. And Katie Griffin returned to voicing Mars after her sudden absence in season two or half of season two at some point. So it was good to see her, like to see that the voice actor returned. Um, I mean, it's kind of weird too because like you would think that they actually replaced everybody, but it turns out that some of them stayed behind and were not like replaced anyhow. And thankfully too, because but it's kind of unusual to think about like why some voice actors were replaced, but others weren't. Maybe because like they wanted to approach other projects and whatnot, which is understandable. I mean, that's their approach in handling things. Although those that didn't like the new voices that were put in for the Cloverway dub will be more than happy to know that Terry Hawks, Karen Bernstein, and Stephanie Morgenstein were still around to voice them in the movies. Also, is it weird to call Cloverway dub what it is because it's more so dubbing the latter half of the first four seasons, whereas Deke was known for the first half. It's not like it's an entirely new thing. It's not like they also dubbed season one or two. I mean, Viz dub makes sense, whereas I'd probably call it like Optimum dub for the first four seasons. I mean, I don't know. It's just terminology that's been used so much. It's hard to like distinguish one or the other if that makes sense. So that's all we pretty much have to say about all that sort of stuff for S. And yes, Lucas is barking. But I got to talk about the story. So apparently, Ray gets visions about the future where the world starts to collapse and explode, kind of reminiscent of Cyborg and Cyberco when he sees visions of um, the Earth facing the unifications of the mother boxes and evil pretty much triumphing in this sort of team. Although, like, Zack Snyder's Justice League sort of flash like visions are much more intense and much more destructive all around because there ain't no one because we ain't never seen anyone like in a similar positions like we ain't never seen um, Serena like mourn for the loss of Darian and become evil at one point. We don't see anything like that. It's just the end of the world basically. Uh, but yeah, they also deal with the things like the the new Deathbusters enemies. One of them actually manages to mess up Serena's transformation brooch, so she gets a new one at one point after confessing her devotion towards Darien. She gets like a new weapon, which is much more effective in knocking out enemies. While her like transformation brooch and her tiara are slightly different. The tiara just has like the red jewel replaced with a moon crescent. At one point, she gets a new power up all around when she like tries to confront one of the witches five by meeting up with Uranus and Neptune after they took away her transformation brooch because they don't want her to get involved. And at one point, she becomes Super Sailor Moon after getting the Holy Grail. Although before then, there was an episode devoted to her where she gets her birthday, and after initially getting upset that no one cared about her birthday before they decided to give a fuck about it, and then Darian tries to get some shoes, but they end up being messed up because of the monster. But before then, Darian manages to upset Serena because he forgot about her birthday, and Serena also realizes that she doesn't know his birthday either. And there's a lot of stuff that goes on with the monster, and the fact that the birthday episode is pretty crazy. It's in two parts, and so much happens in it. It's kind of erratic. But hey, at least they did give us a scene where Mina disguises herself as Sailor Moon with a fake outfit, using the Moon disguise pen, and having an even cringer voice all around. But yeah, that sort of stuff happens. Apart from the typical replacement of the villains, we also get to find out that Hotaru was the daughter of Dr. Tomo, who was corrupted by evil spirit within the thing that he found from the science lab, and that's what happened to the two Tomos, and that's what happens to the Mugen Academy, which turns out to be rather suspicious and dark. And we also get to see the final battle happen with between Moon as well as Mr. Stein as they try to stop them, as well as the fact that Hotaru tries to free herself as Sailor Saturn from the corruptedness of Mr. Nine. The Mugen Academy gets itself a barrier by surrounding it by preventing everyone else from getting inside. The scouts try to fight against everyone that's out there before trying to transfer the powers to Serena to help her win the fight. Weirdly enough, it reminds me so much once again of Zack Snyder's Justice League. Now, people joke about Zack Snyder's a blueprint, this or that, but maybe in this case, Sailor Moon is a blueprint for the final battle for the Justice League movie. I mean, it just looks so familiar, and I'm thinking to myself, yeah, I made jokes about stuff like, oh yeah, you guys remember the scene from the Snyder Cut when Batman was trying to shoot down the force field that Steppenwolf made? Yeah, you could have done that. Or oh yeah, oh shit, you have these three artifacts: the sword for Uranus, the mirror for Neptune, and the orb for uh, Pluto. And that's very much like the mother box. And then you also have the visions. Sailor Moon S could pretty much be the blueprint for Zack Snyder's Justice League. But I'm pretty sure the Snyder fandom would probably hate that because I don't know. It's just one of those things about the fandom. I mean, I don't think this is a jab, by the way, Snyder fans. It's just something that I noticed on Twitter.com. Who keeps posting my on Twitter.com? And that sort of thing. But yeah, all around the season was very nuts all around. I will say that the ending episode is lackluster. It just feels like a typical ending episode, which is pretty meh. Maybe it could have weirdly enough, the first season had a strong ending for its last episode, but I much prefer if the North American dub at least try to make it as a TV movie because Day of Destiny was pretty rushed all around by putting too much stuff in it and cutting other stuff out, and it felt like a rather erratic final episode for season one. The last episode of season two, the one where they take down Wise Man, was great. But then they come up with a real lackluster finale for season two by just having it be a teaser for season three, and that was pretty much unnecessary because it wasn't even it was just stock footage. It was just a freaking clip show, not even a good kind of clip show that we get sometimes. Where it's oh look, let's revisit this event, putting up a screen where they have a flashback that fades to white and they show off the flashback. No, it's just a very mediocre clip show all around, which is a shame too because I don't think the series has clip shows used for it. And season three has two strong episodes that could have been a good finale, especially when it came to the fact that Otaru is now with Dr. Tomo once again, and Uranus and Neptune accept the others. But we decided to have an episode that to end off the season with the fact that Rini thinks that she's going to have to leave just because we need her, but not really, and typical all that sort of stuff. It was very very weak for finale episode, but I don't think we're quite done yet. I have to say real quick though. You know, Rainey does return in the series at one point. Like she pretty much returns. She's now a Sailor Scout to help like the others as well as train to be a hero. But in some episodes, she's non-existent. Like there's episodes where she's around, like in the one with Tomasa, and ones where it involved like a boy that was able to somehow make a clay artifact that looked like the Holy Grail that Sailor Moon later on used to have her super form. But there are other episodes where she's practically non-existent. I theorize that the episodes that didn't feature her were likely made before they decided to bring her back in, and but they couldn't go with the episode order because they're like too late. But they decided to try and find some way to integrate her without trying to rewrite almost everything. So there's some episodes where she wasn't around, while also adding in new ones that were like planned to have her, and it's kind of making me wonder how the production of the series goes because we know a lot of stuff regarding things like what was left in, what was like removed from the manga. We know like all the sort of things that Naoko did, but we don't really get any sort of like behind the scenes stuff like that. Like it's easy to look up stuff like, oh, we had this sort of plan for like Transformers Prime or Star Wars: The Clone Wars, but then again, between the different ways producing a show is handled in the U.S. and Japan, like we can pretty much keep better track of like how the behind the scenes stuff for Japan and for the US is compared to Japan. We can pretty much like understand the behind the scenes stuff between the US more often than we would for Japan because Japan is like much more they're much more focused on quality control and whatnot, getting stuff on deadlines. So there's that. I guess we can talk about the S movie. This one is infamous for the fact that that Luna pretty much has a crush on a human being, which is very strange. It's always weird to see like people have a crush on animals, bestiality and whatnot. But it's even weirder when a human like is being hit on by a cat, and the cat can't try to reveal much because if she speaks, then she's gonna weird people out. And yeah, it's just so goddamn ridiculous. I've seen a clip where like Luna kisses the man in, well, at one point by licking him, and she gets this scene where she's like running in the field, is so happy about it. I'm thinking to myself like, what the fuck is this? But apart from that weird stuff, it is your typical 1 hour long movie. It feels like an extended episode. Animation is great. It's mostly about love. We get to see moments where like Darien feels hesitant to try and live up to being keeping Serena happy with a sort of romance at one point in the park. It's just one of those things that makes the movie seem rather strange. It's a message about love, but the fact that they actually tried so hard to make it where Luna has a crush on a man is just rather unusual. I do think that the art movie is the strongest one, even though I don't like Fiore that much. But yeah, I like the antagonist of this movie better, although her snow monsters are kind of annoying. So yeah, uh, Sailor Moon S is a pretty strong season all around. Although some stuff can be kind of like padded out at times, and some of the choices for some of the characters are a little unusual, and especially in the case of Cloverway, that when it comes to voice actors that were replacing certain ones, and the way they handled the relationship between Amara and Michelle. I did enjoy my watch for it, although at times it did feel like it dragged on at times. But for the times it didn't, I was happy with how it turned out. And now we're about to delve into Super S next time, which will be an interesting commentary, if you ask me. And finally, I'll be talking about the Ghost Rider movies. Yes, those ones. Now, when it comes to Marvel, there is a lot that you can pretty much identify and connect with when it comes to uh, a good majority of their franchises, especially the movies. Like you look at Spider-Man, you think to yourself, "Yeah, it's Spider-Man." There's like so many things to like point out when it comes to Spider-Man movies. Hulk has a few movies up his sleeve, but there's quite a bit to talk about. X-Men has a rich amount of films to like explore for the past 20 years. Some of which are kind of meh, but a good majority of them are pretty good. And you obviously have the Marvel Cinematic Universe, which is massive. While I do think it is mostly in the form of quantity over quality, there are a handful of movies I did like, but most of them I thought kind of got worse over time, especially when it came to them being rather homogenized and more so about the hype instead of just like the long lasting appeal, which is something that you don't get very often apart from the older stuff. But that's just me. So all these franchises, and hell, there's even Fantastic Four, which even like, and I'll give credit to the original like Fox Fantastic Four movies for having that sort of like familial dynamic to them, and that sort of like a more fitting tone and the more appealing aesthetics. Whereas you look at Fan Four Stick and it's garbage. And now we go to Ghost Rider, and even though he's somewhat of a big Marvel guy, he doesn't really get much attention put to the movies, which is rather interesting. Now, to my knowledge, Ghost Rider's movies were distributed by Columbia Pictures, part of the same company that is involved with distributing the Spider-Man movies. But let's put it this way: like, there is a bigger ongoing like audience appeal for Spider-Man than it would be Ghost Rider. Ghost Rider is part of the Marvel Knights projects. Those will be wasting projects, but while he does have a similar role to the likes of like Daredevil and Punisher in terms of like the audience appeal, somehow his films get even less attention because look at the 2003 Daredevil movie. People know it and comment on it either because they think it's not too bad, or because it was known for having Ben Affleck involved. Which, especially back before BVS came out, people were like, "Oh my God, Daredevil's Batman!" And of course, you have the Electro, which is associated with Daredevil, and people like them on. And of course, there's even like the stuff about the Netflix version, which is connected to the MCU, with how it was handled, being done up very well, if I do say so myself, compared to the movie. Of course, you have Punisher, which has had pretty mediocre adaptations beforehand, until the Netflix version did a very good job all around. Although people might know it now just purely like the no, 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 wait type of meme that Frank Castle made. That sort of thing. Um, so the fact that we get ourselves like, oh, there's also Blade, fucking Blade. It's kind of hard to imagine him as a Marvel movie series because Blade himself is just so different, especially like even back then, like he was so different from Spider-Man and X-Men. And I kind of miss back then when like the Marvel stuff used to be very diverse in terms of tone. Like you have the more mass appeal stuff like Spider-Man, and something that's more intermediate like that with X-Men, and something that's more for older audiences, but still like base as hell like Blade. Like I miss that time period of Marvel. I mean, the MCU is trying now to try and make it appealing towards different audiences, but like, well, some stuff, but like, I'll have to admit that it is kind of like it does vary in terms of how much of a fuck they give, especially considering the fact that that apart from trying to appeal towards like the man children that eat up anything Marvel, they also have to appeal to like the TikToker Gen Z twats on that take up most of the MCU fan base and have their PFPs themed after a character for a little bit, making comments just like, oh, like One Division's like totally my style, or like, oh, like the Falcon Winter Soldier is a commentary on American society, and like, yo, dude, oh, Marvel's What If has this and that in it, that sort of shit. But apart from all that, yeah, all this stuff about Marvel stuff, and I haven't gotten much into Ghost Rider. So yeah, Ghost Rider. If you know him, he's pretty much Johnny Blaze. He's a he's a he's like a really awesome stuntman who rides a motorcycle. He once made a deal with the devil, saying that he'll give up his soul to like cure his father's cancer. And while it happened, his father did get killed in another way, mostly from getting burned in a stunt accident. And at one point, like Johnny Blaze becomes the Ghost Rider like later in his life. And he takes on plenty of like other characters in the series. I'll say that the first movie has a really good core idea to it. The sort of like craziness, the horror tone, as well as the sort of approach it has when it comes to the Ghost Rider elements. Because the Ghost Rider stuff is fun to watch and is very dynamic, but there's still a part of it that feels like rather forgettable. Ghost Rider is, well, he is a Marvel staple. He doesn't have the same sort of like huge appeal that you get from like Iron Man or Spider Man or Captain America or Hulk or Wolverine. Because if anything, like Ghost Rider feels more like a sort of uncommon character. I mean, he has popped up in some versions of the series, especially in the Fox Kids shows, but like his movies definitely feel rather generic. Kind of reminds me of a lot of what sort of got like the more under like uncommon sort of Marvel films that were made in the 2000s. You know, the ones you wouldn't give much attention towards. Like it feels more like it feels kind of like it has elements of like the sort of possible kick-ass like awesome writing to it with like the spider it's hard to describe it, but it tries to go for like this sort of like the mainstream audience appeal that Spider-Man had, but at the same time trying to combine it with like the more mature audience stuff of X-Men and Blade. But instead of doing that, they actually try and like use Daredevil as an inspiration, because to my knowledge the director of this movie of Daredevil was also the director of this movie. Farvo was one of the writers, I think, but he was originally like one of the side characters from Daredevil's movie before he wrote the much better done first Iron Man film. And the thing is the fact that like the Ghost Rider movie, the first one, well, it was pretty decent all around, but I have to admit and say that there are things about it that do feel rather lackluster. It's much more polished, much better done. You get proper acting, you get proper like better script writing done here, better storytelling, and better pacing than any of the movies are made before Blade. But at the same time, it does feel like a much like a less prioritized project. It feels like it's just a filler thing, kind of like Elektra. And I say that because like people aren't going to like look at this movie and have the same sort of like um, attachment to that they would Spider-Man and X-Men. I mean, because Spider-Man itself is already like universally appealing towards a lot of people. You got so many memorable characters and lines. X-Men was a very good commentary, and I'll even defend the first Hulk movie for at least just being a character deconstruction of the Hulk, because apart from all the action, apart from all the violence, the Hulk is a complex character in terms of just who's really in control between Bruce Banner and the Hulk. Whereas here at Ghost Rider, it is the sort of like visuals over everything else. It's like style over substance. And while the first movie does a better job of having that sort of balance compared to the second movie, the first movie still falls short because it doesn't have the same sort of like unique identity that we get with the other movies. Like it's trying to have its own identity, but it just doesn't. Like yeah, it just feels rather like it's like when you're looking at a picture without your glasses. It just feels like it was a weird blur, whereas you can see Spider-Man and X-Men's identities crystal clear. And yeah, it's just one of those things that you get from uh, that sort of the first movie. But I'm gonna tell you this: the second movie I think is worse overall. Like, weirdly enough, you got David S. Goyer as one of the writers. He's a legend, and you have a few other like well-known actors. Like you have Sierra Hines, who I might add was like best known for playing Steppenwolf. And shout out to you, Sierra. I don't think I pronounced your name properly, but like you're one of the first few guys who mentioned that the Snyder Cut existed, because you called out how stupid Justice was. So yeah, shout out to you, man. I kind of forgot that he was actually in this movie, but yeah, um, like the first movie at least had a solid core around it. Like good ideas, good cast. Just could have had better execution all around. Whereas the second movie was just pretty poor. Like it tried so hard to make itself more horror oriented, much more dark, much more like vengeful influenced. But at the same time, like it just flip flops between tone and like the quality of script writing. Like people complain that uh people complain that you have Transformers movies for being too to be having different tones. Like it tries to make itself look like it's like it tries to make it so serious, but it has like weird comedic moments. And I already like sick as fuck. I'm already like tired as fuck over the usual complaints towards Michael Bay, because it's already like done ad nauseum, and people need to get some bitches on their dicks. But more importantly, um, like you look at stuff like the first movie, and you get a sense that yeah, there's a good core behind it, but again, the execution could have been better. Whereas here, it just makes it so like weird. It tries to go from being like believable and like consistent with the first movie's tone to being much more comedic, and like it just tries to make itself look, it's trying to make itself too slapdashy, just far too like crazy. I mean, it feels like there's moments where like the Ghost Rider pretty much like do his crazy stuff before he does a noodle face towards an enemy before he kills him. You know, it feels more on par with like the sort of complaints that people have towards the MCU. You know, Thor Ragnarok, except it's even worse here. I'd say. You know, there's a problem when it came to like the fact that the MCU movies started making this a little more comedic. But I think the bigger problem is just how homogenized they are. Whereas here, with Ghost Rider: Spirit of Vengeance, it doesn't know what it wants to fucking be, and as a result of it, trying to make itself too like style over substance even further, without any sort of like proper balance that the first movie had, or at least tried to have, it ends up being a forgettable mess of a film. And you know, like Nicolas Cage is still good in this movie. I mean, he gets himself a proper superhero role after years of not being able to get one. I mean, he tried to be Superman at one point. Oh my god! Imagine the tone of this movie. And sometimes I think that Spirit of Vengeance is what the tone of Superman Lives could have been, because before, like, if it weren't for Man of Steel, people would probably think that Superman movies are all the same. You know, the same boring ass theme song, the same boring ass aesthetics, the same boring ass tone, and yeah, I can almost imagine that that the performance of Nicolas Cage to some extent would probably be. I have sprinkles of this put in his version of Superman if we ever got to see it, because Superman Lives or Reborn or whatever the hell it's going to be called was crazy as fuck. Uh, and you know Hines once again, like obviously he's much better being Steppenwolf in Zack Snyder's Justice League. Well, obviously not Justice, because in Justice he was like, "Oh, you'll all love me," in reference to like just how fucking disgusting Joss Whedon is because he couldn't get any bitches on his dick either. But like, yeah, you get what I mean. The fact that that those two are the few good things about the movie. But again, like it's just one of those things where you know people like would complain about like a specific movie, but I think it applies more here because it's much more prominent and much more obvious. I'll bring up the Transformer example again. Like people exaggerate I think people like exaggerate the complaints of the Transformers movies, and like I said before, like those like most of the complainers need to get some bitches on their dicks, and if they're the opposite sex, well, they need to get themselves like well, probably get probably like log off of Twitter.com and no longer be on Twitter.com. Then again, we should all log off on Twitter.com. It's a unisex thing essentially. But yeah, like that sort of thing like needs to go. But I think the complaints that they put out for this series are much more worse with Spirit of Vengeance, and I say the same thing for the MCU movies. Like I hated Thor Ragnarok because it just felt like it was trying to make the comedy out of the series, and like it's just like, oh my god, it's like it's so funny, guys, but it's just so homogenized. Like it's no different from Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2. But whereas the problem with the MCU is how homogenized it felt, how repetitive it got. Even like although they're trying to fix that now to some extent, you get like stuff like this where the first movie, I'll say it one more time, has some really good ideas to it, although the execution is a little lacking. This one they just vomited ideas and saw what could stick on the wall and try to pass off as a movie. And you know, like this is the modern equivalent to some of the worst like of the older Marvel stuff that we got before Blade, because pretty much every Marvel movie made before 1998 sucked. It's a common fact. I mean, like, but whereas this is more the equivalent towards Howard the Duck, whereas Fantastic, the worst Marvel movie made from 1998 till now, in my opinion, is equivalent to Captain America 1990, because Howard the Duck and Ghost Rider: Spirit of Vengeance have one thing in common. Both of them have like so much shit vomited all over the place. See what could stick and what wouldn't work. See what could stick on a movie. Try and pass off as a film. While Captain America 1990 and Fantastic have one thing in common: interesting ideas that are ruined immensely because the writers just butt fucked everything that they can. And I will say, like, well, with Captain America, it's just a case like them being like, oh, like let's just throw shit. Like, they're just like, oh, let's just make a movie, and like no one cares. No one's gonna watch this garbage anyhow. It's gonna get made fun of on the internet. Whereas fan forcing is either studio interference um, or what's his face being a dickhead, and we get ourselves the worst experience for a Marvel film of all time. And people are like, oh, it's Fox, but like, no, it's like Fantastic Four is still Marvel. It may not be in the MCU, but it's still based on a Marvel character, so I definitely got to call it the worst Marvel movie. Oh boy, a lot of stuff to talk about when it comes to Ghost Rider. I wanted to get out of the way because the first movie turns 15 this year, and the second movie turns like 10 this year. Not many people give a fuck about those two movies, but I just want to get them out of the way because I want to get the more common stuff and just share my thoughts on them. And yeah, that's all I have to say about fucking Ghost Rider and Spirit of Vengeance. One movie that's not too bad, but could be better done, and one that's dog shit. So, yep, I'll see you guys next time for a more positive episode. Until then, take care.
Wait, don't forget to subscribe. If you do, I'll give you a headbutt. That's ogre for thank you.